4, 3, 2.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Jeff Colson, the Junior Hockey Advisor. Just a ton of things on the plate for tonight. Welcome. If this is your first time, we'll get you through it. We'll explain how things work and what we've been doing over the going on our second year, maybe a year and a half now. This is definitely a process that started during the pandemic, or actually grew through the pandemic. But I'm so glad to be back after a few weeks off. We've got a lot of topics to cover. We have more than we can cover tonight. We'll ease back into it. We're not going to slam a lot of things and a lot of content with you. But if you're ready, let's get rolling. Okay, so tonight we're going to cover a few things. We are going to start dissecting a junior roster. And let me back up a little bit. Once again, I'm Jeff Colson. Been in the hockey industry for over 30 years. I've been a general manager. I've been an owner for junior teams, owned several junior teams in different leagues across the board. I've been a coach, a master certified coach. I have an MBA in finance, and this is what I do in the hockey world. This is I am not an advisor. I do not represent players. I will counsel families on key decision points, and we do one-on-one calls for that, but that's just a one-on-one, 1 hour call. I do not advise players on or represent them with teams and deal with that side of things. I say that because I try to stay unbiased on this. I try to give every league an analytical evaluation and approach. So tonight we're going to talk about rosters. We're going to specifically talk about the NAL rosters. We're going to start with the North American Hockey League. Over the next few years, over the next few weeks, we'll break down the EHL. We'll break down the NCDC. We'll break down the USHL. But the most complex roster right now, and you could probably argue the USHL is a fairly complex roster, and we'll get into that in future discussions, is the North American Hockey League. And the reason why it is so difficult is because of that sandwich it has. It is sandwiched in between the USHL and everything else. And you saw that this last year with the draft. And I'm going to throw a lot of stats at you. I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at you. I hope you had a chance to spend 4 or 5 minutes with the video I just put out, which deals specifically with the tender process and getting involved with the tenders and how the tender process works. That's important, and I think the tender process, to understand it, the North American Hockey League and their tender process is completely different than pro sport tenders. It's completely different than the USHL. I'll juxtapose the USHL and the North American Hockey League right now, and I'll do that by explaining right now they're completely opposite in what their intent and purposes are. The North American Hockey League tries to get a pool of players they expect that they want for the next season. There's a percentage that don't make it to the final cut. If a player is tendered in the USHL, first of all, you take a team like Chicago. I think Chicago, since the inception of Chicago in the USHL, which decade, I don't know, maybe 15 years, they've used the tender process 5 times. You'll see one. In a year where a tender gets traded, you'll see a team with 2. However, the tender itself is completely different in the USHL. If you get tendered in the USHL, that pretty much means you're earmarked as one of the base building blocks for the team. Okay, that's completely different than what happens in the North American Hockey League. I went into that video. I won't go into a lot of detail on the tender here because pop that video on after you watch this. I think that 5 minutes will help explain the process out. But if you look at it compared to the USHL, there really is no comparison to it. So just keep that in mind. Hey, I think, James, thanks so much for the comment. I just saw that pop up. We'll throw that up there because anytime I get a comment where it's a compliment, I should throw it on the screen because you guys got to know that somebody out there actually likes and appreciates what I'm doing here. So thanks. James Weaver, Alana Weaver, 2 of the best, by far the best in the billeting world and just great people, great friends now. Yes, my son did billet with him for over the course of 2 seasons. And yes, they are wonderful people. So I'm so glad that they're tuning in tonight. At least one of the two of the dynamic duo are there. Let's say hi to some people here and we'll get rolling again. Mark's checking in from Colorado. Kelly's checking in from Washington. Perry, welcome back, Perry, from Nassau. That's good to see. My cousin Jeannie's on from Flint, Michigan. She's an OHL fan. We'll try to talk her out of that. I think that she might now be a Shreveport fan, and we'll get to that in a second. Once again, I try to keep the personal life aside, but this was a pretty special year, and we'll get into that a little bit. Kevin's on from Pennsylvania. Andy's on from Knoxville, Tennessee. Good to see Andy. He is excited for the new season. Aren't we all? Isn't this going to be great? Jeff's on from Palm Desert, California. Jeff, is Palm Desert, is that 29 Palms area? Is that Joshua Tree area? I'm not sure where Palm Desert is. Obviously the comparison would be to where Palm Springs is, but tell me where that's at. I'd like to know. James is on from Austin, Texas. And I'm coming to you from Pittsford, New York. Hey, I hope you saw that little piece of video I put on earlier. Yeah, we went out to one of those Renaissance festivals, No, I didn't put on my Harry Potter hat and cloak and carry a wand around. I didn't put on any kind of wooden shoes or whatever else those people were doing. But I had a blast. Yeah, people do walk around eating turkey legs, big grogs of ale. And the horse jousts were amazing because no matter if it was an act or not, it's kind of like WWE wrestling. Yeah, it's kind of fake in one sense, but those people are still athletes and they're still throwing themselves around. 2 horses galloping each other and a guy's got a stick and he aims it at your head and it pops you on the head and knocks you off the horse. I don't know how much acting was going on there, but I had a blast. So anyway, let's get back on to where we're at tonight. It's going to be hard to keep me focused because I'm just balled up after 3 or 4 weeks of not talking hockey and getting into it. So some of you know my son played for Shreveport this last season, defenseman for them. Actually, they went to the finals. They won the Robertson Cup, the Shreveport Mudbugs did. Congratulations to them. Outstanding run. And as somebody that always goes into the rink thinking from the coach, management, owner, even when I'm watching my kids, stands away from it. I actually got involved as a fan for one of the first times and as a parent where I really embraced that process for the week we were in Minnesota, Blaine, Minnesota for the championship week. And I tell you what, I had a blast. Kind of let my guard down a little bit and got into the circle, sat with the fans. I never sit with fans. I always am off with the coaches or scouts or, I'm talking to somebody in the scouting room. I never get involved in that side, but I had a blast. It was an unbelievable experience. I've said this before, even before my son was there. If you have not experienced Blaine and you ever get a chance to go up and participate as a fan, even better if your son or daughter, is son probably for the null, it participates in this, go up and enjoy it. Go up and watch it. It's kind of like going to the Pee Wee Quebec tournament. If you've never been to Pee Wee, the Pee Wee Quebec tournament, and you get a chance to go up there, one of the most wonderful events you can go to for hockey. I would put it up there with any of the major hockey, NCAA championships, Stanley Cup playoff games. You go up to Quebec, you don't really, you might be scoffing at me like, oh, Pee Wee game right now. Go up and experience it. Once you've experienced the finals up there and you see, 15, 20,000 rabid fans that, some of them are family and friends, but the majority of them are from Quebec and get a chance to do it. It's an unbelievable event. So anyway, I digress. Let's get back into what I'm talking about. And tonight we're going to talk about the roster. So part of what I explained a little bit earlier is the roster is broken down into, basically 5 components. You've got your returning players. Don't call them a veteran because you'll see why in a second. You've got your tenders, your drafts, your affiliates, and your free agents. So we're right in the middle of this process right now, which is called main camp. Some are starting next week, some ended this week. We're right in the hub, especially of the North American Hockey League main camps. Now, main camps when you talk about the status of a returner, a draft pick, a tender, an affiliate player, or a free agent, the main camp is where that ticket ends. No matter what your status was coming into main camp, as you leave, that status doesn't matter anymore. In other words, if you're drafted to get into the main camp. If you're a tender, you're tendered to get into the main camp. There is no assurance of a roster spot, and it's a little bit deceiving at times. Somebody says, well, I'm tendered. I'm going to Johnstown or wherever you're tendered at. And it sounds good. It sounds good to say, you know what? I'm there. I got tendered. But let's look at the numbers a little bit. First of all, in the summer, a team can protect 35 players. You in the main camp, there's going to be anywhere from 4, 5, 6, 8 teams. And if it's 8 teams at 20 players a team, which a lot of times they'll carry 3 or 4 goalies on a team in a main camp, depending on what program it is. There is no rules here. But keep in mind that roster, they're looking at 160 players, let's say. Let's say there's 8 teams, 20 teams apiece, 20 players apiece. So if they're looking at 160 players, of course some of the returners have preferential treatment because they had an outstanding year and they're expected to be back on the team. But that's not in stone, okay? Of course there's going to be some draft picks that were high-end draft picks that are going to be expected to make the roster. But that's not the reality of how things work. When you get into that camp, and we'll talk about the dynamics of the main camp in a second, it's going to go from 160 to 35 in 3 or 4 days. Boom, done. They'll have their showcase games. That's the round robin they play. And most of them run by the same system. You might have a practice or two. You'll have some showcase games. Then they'll do an all-star game. And now it's popular to do 2 or 3 all-star games. I guess that's the participation thing so that everybody can say they played in an all-star game in a North American or USHL camp. It doesn't really matter. Okay, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is, in fact, there'll be players that play in all-star games that don't make the 35-person roster. You need to get to that 35 roster. But remember, first week of September, that goes from 35 down to 23. Now, last year was 25. That was pandemic-related. And a lot of the stats we'll talk about tonight, I'm going to relate the stats from this year draft tenders, meaning going forward from here up and moving forward. We're going to skip the pandemic year for a lot of the stats because they're so skewed because of a few factors, mainly that the BCHL was not up and running, so we got an influx of BCHL players. We had an influx of freshmen that did not go to college that were eligible, that were expected to go to college that year, that came back before they started. Then you actually had players that still had junior eligibility that left college and came back and played in the North American Hockey League. So you were top-heavy in talent. It was the most talented North American Hockey League season ever. And it's the way it was, So we're not going to use that as a comparison. We'll use 19, and we'll talk about the difference between the two. So with that said, going back to the roster, you're going to go from 35 to 23 within a couple of weeks once the training camp starts. Now, training camp is different than main camp. Main camp is everybody. It's people are invited for many different reasons. There's a lot of different dynamics and politics that are in main camps. And politics isn't a negative word here, but there's politics that go on, and I'll explain that in a second. But to go from 35 to 23, you're dropping a third of your roster almost. Okay, 30% of the kids are going to be gone after they assume they were going to be in a town. So let's say you get picked up by, I'm just picking a program. Let's say you're going to Bismarck. Let's say you're going to Amarillo. It doesn't matter. You pick up, you move, you bring all your belongings, you get there, and then 2 weeks later, the roster gets trimmed and you're not there, okay? Now, 23 is a little bit of a misnomer because there'll be there's some ways a roster can be protected beyond that. If somebody has a long-term injury, they can be put on injured reserve. There'll be a couple of players that have affiliate status that roll around, but most teams are going to, in the North American Hockey League, are probably going to be dressing 21 because you can dress 21 now, and they'll have 3 to 5 guys in the stands for different reasons. So let's say they got 24 to 26 players that are in camp or there for the year. That's still different than the 35. They're going to drop that number down. Now, that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it. Because remember, the USHL is going to trim. The USHL is going to shuffle and adjust. So that means while you're going through the process of trimming down and trying to make a North American Hockey League roster, you could even throw the BCHL in there. And, this year's going to be very difficult to understand what's going on with the BCHL because they pulled out of their governing body, the CJHL, and they're independent now. So we don't really know what's going on there. Last year, the league that absolutely took the biggest hit and just got knocked back with a couple body blows because of the pandemic is the BCHL, more so than any other league. They had the most to lose because they had such a high-end talent. Now, you still have BCHL and USHL kids coming down. If they get cut, they're coming in as free agents late to the process, or they were drafted by a team, so their rights are still held. So if let's say I'm in Des Moines, and I make the main camp in Des Moines, and Des Moines is a USHL team, and right when the season starts, I get trimmed, I get cut. Okay, if I wasn't drafted or tendered by a null team, that means I can go anywhere I want. If I was tendered or drafted by a null team, I'm the property of that team. So one way or another, they're going to get into the North American Hockey League if that's where they choose to go. And the majority are going to choose to go to the North American Hockey League. Now, as they come in, that's going to bump another player. So of that 35, this last year is not a good year because there was a much more bumping going on than a normal year. But it's not uncommon to see 2, 3, 4 players that trickle in late as free agents after the season has officially started, where you're in training camp, you've done some preseason games, maybe you've even played a game or two. So that's important to know as you go through this process. Now that funneling process doesn't change. It's the same at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. But remember, this league is a league that has players coming up from the Tier 3 level and players coming down from the Tier 1 level. It's much, much easier to build a roster in the USHL. Now, it's hard to find talent, don't get me wrong. But once you're there and you know what you have, it's much, much easier because they're not coming down and you're not getting where they're going to come from if they're going to come down to the USHL. Yeah, you get the rare player that'll come back from college, but that's still that's the anomaly. That's not the norm. So I'm going to get into some numbers first, but let's go back to the dynamics of the main camp so you can understand a little bit of the politics that go on with main camps and a little bit of the politics that go on with tenders and drafts. So remember, you have a North American Hockey League team. They have an affiliate NAPHL team. They most all have affiliate NA3HL teams, which are the Tier 3 teams. So they're required to actually tender 2 NAPHL teams or players and 1 player from the NA3HL. So there's 3 picks already in the tender process that are going to go to players that they already have in the system that are I don't want to say they're locked because rarely do these players make it to the final roster, but they're in the system, okay? So that really leaves 7 tender picks that you can go after and pick up anybody. Now, this is where people get a little bit confused, and the video that I put out explains, but I'll try to explain a little bit of it here too. 35 players are protected in the summer. So you take your returners off that 35. Let's say you have 10 returning players. Now you're down to 25. You get your 10 tenders that you can pick and select, 7 of which you can pick from anywhere. 3 are coming from, 2 from the NAPHL and 1 from the NA3HL. So you take those 10. Now you're 20. That means you're only left with 15 of the 17 rounds for the draft. If that's a little bit confusing, let's put it this way. If you're returning 20 players, okay, you can't tender 10. Excuse me. If you're returning 25 players, you would only be able to tender. You would have no drafts because you'd have your 10 drafts. So if I had 20 returning players, which would be really good, that doesn't happen very often. But let's say I have 20 returning players. All of a sudden, I get my 10 tenders. I'm at 30 there. I'd get 5 draft picks because you get 35. So, I'd get 5 rounds. And you'll see that from time to time. The biggest thing to keep in mind, there's 17 rounds in the draft. There was only 1 player taken in the 17th round. There's only 2 players taken in the 16th round, 3 in the 15th, 3 in the 14th, 5 in the 13th. So you're talking about, of the rounds 11 through 17, there's only just over 20 players taken in those rounds. Why is that important? Because, there's just not that many spots in the draft for players because you got returners and tenders that have the priority. That reduces your number. Remember, the total number is you add up your returning players and you add up your tenders, and you minus that from 35, and that's how many draft picks you get. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Now let's talk about that draft a little bit, and I'm going to go into some analytics, and I'm only going to go into the front end of the analytics on this, but understand on this draft, this is the most, first of all, each team weights drafts and tenders differently. There is no two teams that handle their business the same way in the North American Hockey League. Some have a system of front-loading their draft with, the can't-miss players, and some wait till the last few rounds to put their can't-miss players on because they want to hype up a couple of kids that are the elephants. And what I mean by elephants, going elephant hunting means I'm going to go out and try to get a kid that I really don't think I have a shot at. That's trying to, pull in if you're fishing, that's trying to catch a whale. If you're hunting, that's trying to get an elephant. You're going for the big game prize. You're going for the big one. So you got 17 rounds. You're doing a couple things here. You're trying to take a couple stabs at some players that are in the BCHL or they're in the USHL, or they're a first-year college guy that has eligibility left. So they left with 2 years of juniors. They played 1 year of college. Now, why in the world would you go after USHL guys, BCHL guys, and college guys? Well, because you've built great relationships with colleges, you've built great relationships, and I'm talking about the management, the player development people at the NAL team, the coaches, the owners, the management. They all have great relationships with colleges. They talk to advisors, and we're talking about the advisors that are really in the know, that are out there doing their job, that really have the pulse of the business. And they realize that there's two guys on I'm going to just pick on Des Moines again. There's nothing wrong with Des Moines. I just like saying Des Moines. There's two guys in Des Moines that were not getting a lot of ice time. They're pretty much been told that their future in Des Moines is a little bit uncertain. And it doesn't look like they're going to get traded, and it doesn't look like there's other USHL interest. Maybe these guys have an advisor, and the advisors say, hey, look, I don't know if you're going to pick up another USHL team. Or because they didn't get a lot of time, they want to produce at a higher level. They want to play more to showcase their skills. You take a stab at those guys. You actually draft those players because they could eventually be somebody that comes down to your team. So you're going to take a stab at those. If there's a guy that's got junior eligibility left, that's a freshman at Bentley. I'm just picking on Bentley. I don't like saying Bentley. It's an okay word, but it's not like Des Moines. Des Moines is fun to say. Bentley, it's just a name. So let's say I got a freshman at Bentley that still has some eligibility left. You take a stab at him because you hear that he might want to come back and play juniors to bolster his ability to move to a different college program because it didn't work out the way he thought it was going to work there. So you're taking a couple stabs there, but at the same time, you've got to pull from the Tier 1 elite. You've got to pull from Minnesota high school, maybe Detroit, Wisconsin, Boston high school too. You got to pull from the preps. Although preps had a jump this year, preps are not usually an area where the North American Hockey League puts a lot of focus. I think that's going to change because of the amount of East Coast North American Hockey League programs now. But you're trying to pull young, you're trying to pull veteran at the same time, and there's a squeeze there. You're taking risk at some of these because you're taking a stab at a kid that's in the USHL. You don't know if he's going to come back. He might say, hey, you know what, I'm okay here if I'm a fourth liner and I'm only getting 10 shifts a day or 10 shifts a game. Or he might decide to jump. But if he jumps, you've got him. That's why last year during the pandemic, there were so many people that took some stabs at USHL players, and the BCHL players, that they won. Almost all the Americans that were drafted into the North American Hockey League, I think the number was, the draft, there were 14 players taken out of the BCHL, for the pandemic year, and 13 of the 14 ended up playing in the league. Most of those were Americans. There were Americans that were drafted. Why? There was the border issue. Why? There was uncertainty with the BCHL. Those players wanted to play. And, the several managers that I have great relationships with in the USHL, the overwhelming feeling is, they don't support players coming to the USHL from the BCHL as a whole, because they had a shot at one point to make that choice between the USHL and the BCHL. They chose to go the other route, and they're not. Their logic is, hey, look, they could have come to us at first. They can go somewhere else. We're set. We're all set, and that was the attitude with a lot of them. So anyway, that's why it's so difficult. You're trying to draft up, you're trying to draft down, you're trying to draft from a lot of different places, and that's why you see in main camp a lot of different strategies, because you might have one of your scouts that's a prep scout. You might have one of your scouts that's up in Minnesota doing Minnesota high school. You've got somebody that's really bearing down on that Tier 1 elite HPHL in the Detroit market, and usually, if they've been with you a while, there's a trust factor that comes into play. They get a say, and maybe sometimes even allocated draft picks where, hey, we're going to let our Detroit scout pick 2 and 3, or 2 or 3 picks. We're going to give our last 3 drafts to our guy that covers the, whatever league, the Tier 1 elite, whatever you want to look at there. So there's different ways they go about this. So the politics of that main camp team, you're going to see a lot of different things there. People say money grab, money grab, money grab. I really don't like hearing that, and here's why. Everything in hockey's for profit. The rink should be called a money grab. Okay, your jerseys, your skates, your sticks. How come people don't go money grab? Well, maybe they do. Maybe they say this, but focus on the price of sticks as being a money grab. These junior teams and what they charge and the ice time they charge and the value of it. I think it's a pretty decent value to go to a main camp. You spend a couple $100. You get to meet some coaches. You get to skate with some competitive players. You get exposed. You actually get looked at. You actually get scouted. My son was a mid-level USHL draft pick. He went to his first camp it wasn't his first camp. His first camp as a drafted player, and they treated everybody across the board the same. One of the guys on this team was just there as an invite. They got video breakdown. They got coaching assessment. They got feedback individually across the board. And that's the kind of thing you're not going to see if you go to a regular camp. You're not going to get high-level coaches giving you breakdown and feedback. And that happens across the board. Not all the same way, not all at the same level. But it's a great experience, and I just don't like to hear the word, or the phrase that we hear, which is, "Hey, these are money grabs." So the politics of these main camps. Remember, you're doing a lot of things. You've got an owner that's trying to build a relationship with the town he's in. He and the general manager, or maybe he and the marketing manager, are working to construct a relationship with local hockey organizations, youth organizations, and usually they want to pull in kids from the local or regional area to participate in the camps. It's good for the community. It's might even get some time on the social media for the local youth organizations. Hey, look, Shreveport brings in 4 kids from the Shreveport U18 team to main camp. It's a good story. Honestly, I don't know if Shreveport's doing that or not. Once again, just to throw it out there, Shreveport is a fun word to say, and mud bugs is incredibly fun to say. Just had to throw that out there. Now, so you've got an owner that might be leaning on, hey, let's make sure we've got some local presence. Let's get some local talent in here. You've got a player development person that is or head scout. Different teams call them different things. It might be your coach. It might be somebody that's autonomous. And he's got his guys. He's got his network of scouts that are out in the field. Now, each of those scouts want their say. They want their guys there. They're pushing, hey, we really want to see this guy, and this guy. So, once again, you're trying to appease everybody to give everybody a chance at the party. The invites that you see, yeah, there'll be some invites. There'll be some blind invites from most North American Hockey League teams where they invite players. Now, how do you get a blind invite? The blind invites usually come off of a backdoor system. There are systems out there that are built just for teams to use, and they'll invite players with a minimum of Tier 1 elite experience, 50 games at that level, or players in the Detroit market with HPHL or Tier 1 elite experience, or they'll do the same thing. They'll sort for just players on prep. They'll sort for just players at a certain level of Minnesota high school hockey, and they'll send those emails out. And it's really regional for the most part, but that's how you get those blind emails from even quality programs. USHL teams do it, and all teams Tier 3 across the board, they all do it. So you'll see that is the augment to everything else that's going on. But remember, you've got your tenders. You've got your draft picks, and the most drafts you can have is 17, and there's, like I said, there was only one team that picked 17. Everybody else is picking an average of about 10 this year. Okay, so if you're picking 10 draft picks, you've got a couple of them from the NAPHL, you've got a couple of them, each team, actually there's only 27 NA3HL picks this year they were taken, so if there's only one NA3HL kid per team. But that's done. You've got those kids that are in there. The rest are all appeasing different segments of your organization. You may have the marketing person that's pushing you to get this youth organization and get some players represented in the main camp because they want to do a block ticket sales. Yeah, that happens. They want to get block ticket sales for that youth organization. So, hey, can we get 5 or 10 kids into that, from that organization into main camp? They want to build some hype. They want to build a relationship. So there's a lot more going on than just getting the best team on the ice when it comes to main camp. The coaches are all focused on the best product, but the overall organization is trying to build and grow that organization and build the footprint of that organization. I hope that helps. Ask questions on that as we go along, and I'm going to start throwing some numbers out, but I see some questions coming in. Let's talk first. We'll look at Kelly's question. What is the difference between the NAPHL or NA3HL? Is one league stronger than the other? Well, the biggest difference is you really can't go on strength. The NAPHL is your U16, U18 level. That's just like the Tier 1 elite, but they've got their league, and there's some very good quality teams in there. Is it the same as the high-end Tier 1 elites? If you take the top 5-10 teams from the NAPHL, how they stack up against the top 5-10 teams of the Tier 1 elite. The Tier 1 elite is still the darling of both the USHL and the North American Hockey League. You're going to see a lot of your 16-18 picks coming from there. The NAPHL just doesn't have the same depth. There's some talent there, and some of the teams are very strong, but there's not the same depth. A lot of those NAPHL players roll right into NA3HL. So one of the ways that a lot of people explain it is the NAPHL in the North American 3, the NA3 is actually your older players that age out from U18, U16, and 18 up into the NA3. Now, the NA3's got a bigger footprint than just pulling from the NAPHL, but as far as which one's better or not, they serve two different purposes. 16s and 18s can still have relationships directly that are that affiliate level. We haven't really talked about affiliates yet. That you can affiliate with a North American Hockey League team. You get very few players that are successful on affiliating from an NA3 level team. There are some teams that maybe get one or two guys up from their NA3 team. They get a chance to skate with in a game or two, but they're usually low priority. They're usually not players that stick. Now, there's once again, everybody will have an example that will prove me wrong. I'm talking about the statistical trend. So you'll see players come from the NAPHL, the U16-18 level, that'll get drafted or tendered, and will stick a lot more than you'll see coming out of the NA3 that actually stick. I hope that helps, Kelly. Great question across the board. Let's say hi to a couple other people. Jamie's there saying hi. He's got a thumbs up. Greg Crane, good to see you from Amherstburg, Ontario. Greg, I flew over. I flew back and forth to Ann Arbor. I flew back and forth to Port Huron a few times, just buzzing around the skies, finding different places to go over the last few weeks, and flew right over you and wanted to actually, say hello and drop something down at your house. I didn't know exactly where you live, but I knew the town. I was like, there it is. So it was kind of fun over the last few weeks. Let's, got our answer on Palm Desert. Palm Desert is the Coachella Valley, which is about 15 miles from Palm Springs. Seattle Kraken's AHL will play in the new arena here in 2022. Well, that's good to know, Jeff. I wasn't aware of that. Good information there. And it looks like Shreveport fans were buzzing. They absolutely were. Both sides were. The Aberdeen crowd was going pretty good there. Chris is on from VA. That's good to see. We got Brian from Trenton, Michigan. Once again, I flew over Trenton, Ann Arbor. I got rerouted around, had to go down south of Detroit, so I got over Trenton too. So anyway, let's talk some numbers and let's have a little fun with some numbers. I'm not going to go deep into analytics, but I want to kind of show you some things that I think might be interesting to some of you. Some of you, this will be time to go night-night, and you're like, that's way too much. But let's just pop this on, and let's get into this, and I'm going to show you some things here. So what this here is, this is an entry draft table of the top 8 teams from 2019. And these are your top teams in Odessa, okay? And Odessa's on there because they were the bottom basement. It's just trying to give some idea of separation between the top 8 and the bottom. So that first column there is the number of picks. So you can see Lone Star had 10 picks. Remember, everybody doesn't get the same amount of draft picks. It's the amount of returning players plus your 10 tenders, divided, subtracted from 35, and that gives you your number of actual draft picks. So you'll see teams like Topeka here. This was the year they were returning everybody, so they had very few draft picks. The next number there is players retained from the draft. So it sounds like, oh boy, you can really get a lot of really good information here. Lone Star, they kept 50% of their draft picks. Amarillo, only 25. Odessa, 10%. Now, there's a lot of other things that come into play here. What are they using the draft picks for? Are they going for consistency? Do they use the draft picks to, just hunt for a few whales? In the case of Topeka, since they had so many returners, the reason why they're at 20% is I think they shot for the moon. If I remember correctly, Topeka really went, hard on trying to pull in some top-end talent. And so they might be very happy with only getting 20%, one of 5 players. That's in the middle of the graph there, Topeka. They had 5 draft picks. They got 1 that stuck. Okay, so for 20%. Now, it depends on the team. Everybody's rationale, logic, and strategy is different on the draft. No two teams draft the same. Some use all their draft picks to go whale hunting or whale fishing or elephant hunting. Other teams are very conservative and they pluck away at players that they think will fit certain spots on the team. They're not looking for that superstar. So you look at this and you go, okay, and to be honest with you, you go all the way down to Odessa. They had 10 draft picks, only 1 stuck. That's because Odessa had a few really rough years. And any players that were there or got drafted were either used as trade bait. The draft picks were used as trade bait and they got traded right away. Or the players just refused to go there and they went to the BCHL. They went to the NCDC. They went somewhere else because it was a rough period of time for Odessa. Odessa's has been in a state of influx for a few years. I think they're on coach 4 or 5 now. Just lost their head coach that went to Maine as an assistant coach, so they're bringing in a new head coach this year. 3 straight years of the new head coach. Tough to actually build something on that premise. Let's hope it catches traction this year. They will. It's just a matter of time. So if you go to that next one over there, of the players that they kept, here's the total points that they retained. So those 5 players at Lone Star made up 103 points, goals and assists. You don't just do goals because assists are going to be important in this number too. This is sans goalies. Goalies have been taken out of these numbers here. So Amarillo had 2 players, 43 points. That's pretty darn good. That average points per retained players is wrong there. I can see that right now. The formula is wrong. But Fairbanks, at first you go, well, they kept 1 player, only 7 points, but he might have been a stay-at-home defenseman, so you can't read everything into this. Now, what you can do, though, is you can go over Average points per retained players, we know that formula is wrong on the second one, though. But that's an interesting number, because now you can actually look and say, okay, what is the amount of points that we got last year, and let's look at the last 3 or 4 years. What are we getting for production out of our drafts? Are we getting anything out of these players as far as points go? And then you look at the overall total points from the team. That's the 519, the 498. That's those big numbers right there. So that year, these set of numbers were put together on a shortened year, and we actually extrapolated that out to be what it'd be for the full year. A top team would have been a 600-point team. That's goals and assists for this year if all teams played out all their games. Obviously, in 2020, that didn't happen. So what you're looking at there is, okay, if this is the number of what we need for points to be a top 8 team, and we have draft expectations, what do we need out of those draft numbers? Now, what we're doing is, you hear me use this phrase a lot. A lot of design and build into the team is going, okay, points from returning players, points from our tenders, points from draft picks. Where are we going to get the points? Now, this is all the average across the board. This is not saying we know for a fact this guy's going to get 40 points. This is going overall. We would have an expectation. Our goal would be to get a certain amount of points. So now you go over to the next one. It's the percentage of total team points from the retained players. Now you can see that once again, Lone Star, they had 5 kids. Once again, they were the best program at the end of the last year. 20% of their production came from the draft. Now you look across the board. Some other teams, we go back and look at who else is on this list. Let's go down and grab Shreveport. They're battling Lone Star that year, and their production from draft picks is half. Well, at first you go, Lone Star is much better than Shreveport at the draft. That's not necessarily true. What it says is, A, that Shreveport could have drafted more defensemen, and B, Shreveport may have had so many players that locked in from returners. Because remember, their number, they had 2 less picks that year, and only 2 stayed. They could have been doing a little whale hunting, whale fishing, elephant hunting. Got to get it right, Jeff. Don't mix your metaphors. Or they could have literally just been all defensive for their players, knowing that they're both very defensive teams, but Shreveport is a lockdown defensive team. They're not looking for point production the same way. If you notice their numbers, 519 to 455, even though those teams are battling for the top, they're just not in a position where they're looking to be the top offensive production team. So their mindset's different. But you look across the board at this too, now you get an idea of what some of the teams do. They go, and I'll show you another graph here. Okay, this is basically showing you the returners from these are drafted players. This is their 2018 points in the middle column. I hope you can see that right above my head, right there. And then this is 2019 returner points, and this is the point improvement. So this is the players that were drafted, and this is the point improvement. So what you do is you look at the team and you go, Amarillo, they got a 398% return on their 2018 draft. That means that their point production went up from 43 to 171. That's pretty darn good. Okay, now you look down here at the bottom, and that's Topeka. Once again, they carried a lot of veteran players. They only had a 6% production improvement. Now, once again, Topeka was a new program at the time too, so they kept and retained a lot of players that were already performing high. They already had roles. They were young players that kept those same roles. It was very difficult for them to move up if they were already getting good numbers. So the bottom line is, you have to look at this as an equation a lot of times. So this is the draft efficiency for Odessa. Round pick. This is round by round for 2019, and this shows you what year they were, the person's name, and the league average. So the league average in the first round, 53% of the kids stuck. Second round, 42%. And if you notice that the number doesn't necessarily decrease in a sequential decreasing manner. In other words, it doesn't funnel down to 0 here, because these back rounds here, the 9, 10, and even 11, the numbers started rising back up again. So you're not seeing a diminishing return if you're a late draft pick in the North American Hockey League. And the reason that there's not a diminishing return on the draft is because you might have that BCHL kid that's at 8th or 9th that you're not trying to impress him, you're just trying to protect him in case he comes to the league. That USHL kid doesn't need to be your first round pick. You want to save that first round pick for a U18 kid because then he feels that it's prestigious to go in the first round. That 9th, 10th, 11th pick, you got that 17th pick if you've got it. You might use that on a kid that you just want to make sure you've got his rights in case he chooses to leave college or chooses to leave the USHL. So they're not as important, but if they hit, and 38% of the league had 10th rounders that come in, and that's because that mid to late round kid gets picked, and they're usually getting picked from programs that, there might be a little bit of a chance they're going to come in and play in the North American Hockey League, and they're just keeping their rights protected. So does that make any sense at all? I didn't want to get it really deep into this, but the analytics behind this is you always look for the percentage of improvement of your team's trend. So, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, I look back and I go, a returning player that's a forward, you can even say left wing, what is his percentage of improvement if he's a goal scorer? What is that offensive defenseman? What is his percentage of improvement for point production year after year if they stay in our system? So some of these programs got this locked down to an art. They know their draft, they set a goal. They extrapolate last year's numbers and say, hey, look, we needed 600 points to be in first place last year. Okay, we know we've got 8 guys returning that are goal scorers. Of those 8 guys, they put up 200 points last year. We need them to be in the 260 to 280 amount of points. We need our draft picks to come in with 100, 150 points. We need our tenders to come in with 150 points. Whatever it is, they each break it down a little bit differently. So that's how you backdoor and you extrapolate in with the analytics of a draft. Now, does everybody do it that way? No. Do a lot of programs in one form or fashion do that? Yes. So not only are they looking for a left wing, but they're looking to see what they expect from the players they have returning as far as their improvement in points. And veteran players usually improve. Okay, that's across the board. If you're a first-year junior player versus a third year, you're usually going to see a ladder progression of improvement across the board moving up. It doesn't matter what league you're in. If you're in the North American Hockey League Tier 3, it's the normal course, and usually there's something wrong or different that happened that the point production goes the opposite direction. So that's a little bit of the breakdown. I'm not sure if any of this made sense. Let's see what kind of questions you got coming in. Okay, here's one from Perry. Perry says, let me get back to my full screen here. Perry says, do you need to sign up for the draft or teams find the players? That's a great question, and my answer to this is going to be you don't need to sign up for anything, for any draft. You do not. However, remember, the draft is deep. We're talking about several hundred players, and remember, if a team has, okay, what do we got? We've got 29 teams in the North American Hockey League right now, and I don't have my calculator handy, but 29 teams, yeah, I do. I'm going to do a little math for you here and give you a little bit of an idea why it's important to do something, and I'm going to explain it. 29 teams times 23, there's 667 players roughly, and I'm going to put that number up to 700 because you'll have some players that are unprotected on a roster. So you got 700 players, okay? If there's 29 teams and they average 10 returning players, that half of them are coming from there. The tenders, each team has 10 tenders. 10 players are coming from tenders. And once again, this is for final rosters. It's not accurate. I'm just kind of giving an idea. It means the rest is coming from the draft. So you can have several hundred players that are filling rosters from the draft and free agency. If you're a free agent, you can be drafted or still get invited to a camp. Either way. So how do you make sure that people know about you? Of course, you can reach out through an advisor, and a lot of people do use advisors, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But the most important thing to do is almost every single team has do you want to play in the North American Hockey League? Do you want to get recruited, or some way of capturing your information? And if not, the North American Hockey League website itself has a place where you can put that information. It goes into their central scouting database. So then you'll get invited to their camps, from the central scouting side. Now, it's extremely important that you reach out, and you reach out to numerous teams if you think you've got that ability. Once again, though, that's a strong assessment of where your current ability is. And, okay, I hope that helps, Perry. Great question, though. Greg, thanks for the comment. Once in a while, I hit on something that the industry professionals like to hear, and that's good to hear. I want to talk a little bit right now about advisors, because some of you feel like I lean on advisors as a negative term. I don't necessarily dislike advisors. I dislike dishonest advisors, and I dislike manipulative advisors, but I dislike dishonest coaches and manipulative coaches too, or salesmen in a car lot, or policemen, or whatever else. So I don't really look at the advisor field. Do I think that it needs to be regulated? Yes. Would I like to see USA Hockey take advisors and make them go through the same kind of scrutiny that a coach, a GM, anybody that gets in contact with a player has? Absolutely. I don't know why USA Hockey refuses to look at the advisor role as somebody that has contact with a player that's affiliated with hockey. They're working in between NCAA Division I, Division III, ACHA, and juniors, or they're working through Tier 1 AAA hockey and juniors, either on the top or the bottom, trying to place players. They should have background checks. They should have to go through certification, just like anybody else in USA Hockey has to go through. So that part frustrates me. But I want to walk through a little bit of what, if you're thinking about hiring an advisor, and of course I've got a webinar. You have to pay for it, but there's a webinar that walks you through the process in detail of how to hire an advisor. But I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of some things you should expect from a good advisor. I'm going to give you the good advisor, and I'm going to tell you what the ones that frustrate me do. A good advisor, he listens on that first phone call and gives you no suggestions on the first phone call or first meeting. He listens. He listens to your goals. He listens to your parents. And that's important too, because the parents and what they're trying to do may not always align with the player. So they're listening and is gathering information. Fact finding is key to a good advisor. They should be listening. It should take them a good hour just to hear your story. Talk about your past. Talk about your season. Talk about what you do, your off season, what you like, what you don't like, what your expectations are. All of that should be done in that first meeting. Number 2, they need to be able to turn around at the end of that conversation and verbalize to you in a very short, concise way exactly what you told them. So what I heard from you was that you think you're this type of player and you're looking to go here. What I heard is this is what you do in the off season. Here's where you're at academically. What I heard was here's the type of junior team you think you want to play for. Here's the kind of college you want to go to. Am I correct on all that? So they're not only just listening to your goals and listening to you and your parents, but they're making sure they can verbalize it back so everybody's on the same page. If that doesn't happen, the advising process doesn't work. I made the mistake of having a player, one of my former players, I hired him from my son early on. This is real early on. My son was like, I need an advisor. So one of my former players was an advisor. And the conversation really went south right off the bat, because he's like, I'll reach out to this school, I'll reach out to that school. My son was 14, 15 at the time. He was getting, opportunities and looks and discussions about higher level teams. But the point was, he didn't listen to where my son was academically. He didn't listen to where my son was interested in going. He started off dominating the conversation right off the bat. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't work, because then all of a sudden, it's like uncomfortable because you're not on the same page. So once that conversation's done, the next thing a good advisor does is he hangs up the phone and he starts calling people. He calls your former coaches. He calls people that you played against, that coached against you. He calls colleges that potentially might want you, or if you're still looking at juniors, he calls junior programs that are in the level that you say you want to play at. Do you know this kid? Have you watched him yet? What do you think? Where does he fit in? Have you had any conversations with him? So they do all their homework on that side of things, and they collect data. Now, the next part is important, because once they go back and do their homework on you, they're going to come back and sit down with you and give you a brutally honest assessment. And this is before you sign with that advisor. A good advisor doesn't take a check on their first meeting. A good advisor listens to you, says, let me think about this, let me see if you fit for what we're doing, does his homework. Of course, that means that they're going to put an hour or two in and maybe not collect a check from you, but then after they come back, they're brutally honest and saying, hey, look, here's what the hockey world, here's what your coaches said. I talked to your last 3 coaches, here's how they assess you. I talked to your assistant coach, here's how he assesses you. I talked to, 2 coaches that you coached against you, here's what they say about you. Okay, here's the negatives, here's the positives. Now, I talked to some junior programs about you. You're not on the radar at that level. You're on the radar with these teams here, but you're not on the radar with the level you thought you're at. And they come back and give you a brutally honest assessment of where you're at. Then they say, here's what I can do for you. Now the approach is so much more honest and transparent, because they already have shown you that they're going to work for you. They've already went out and talked to people. They know exactly where you fit in the world. And then you both can agree or disagree that it's a good fit to work with that advisor. If you got an advisor that's already giving you solutions on their first meeting, walk out of the room. If you got an advisor that's already saying, I've got a spot open on a team, here, you're perfect for it in the first meeting or in the first few minutes, or they're advertising that way, that to me is insanity. Yes, some people find good fits that way, but if you have the opportunity to find advisors that do their homework first, that's the guy you want to hire. And, can I tell you which advisor is right for you? No, I can't. It's not my position to tell you which advisor works for you. Just like I can't tell you which college is right for you. I can tell you there's good colleges and there's bad colleges. But every fit is a little bit different, so it's not really what I'm here to do. What I'm here is to walk you through the process so you understand that. I hope that helped. Give me some comments on that if that makes sense and if that helped you at all. And give me your comments on this overall. This is going to turn into the next few mini videos that I put out, just like I put out on the tender process. I've got all my notes here for the draft, the affiliates, the free agents. We'll tell the story so that you have an understanding of how this works, and it'll trickle down. We'll talk about other leagues too, and we'll make sure that everybody has got a better understanding, because that's what we're here for, is to educate and to make sure that you have a better understanding. What I need from you, if you like this, though, this is the same thing you hear on YouTube. First of all, if you haven't gone over to our YouTube, Junior Hockey Advisor on YouTube, please go over there, like and subscribe on that. Part of it is we try to grow this, and we try to grow advertisement onto this. They look at the overall social media, and we're weak. We're weak on our YouTube. Our Facebook's off the charts. We have an extremely good demographics on Facebook, but we are not strong on YouTube. So if you can like or subscribe to that YouTube page, it'd be huge for me. It would really help. If you're not on our Facebook discussion group, Junior Hockey Advisor discussion, make sure you jump on there. Great information. We keep it positive. We ensure it's positive. There's no solicitation there. We don't want advisors soliciting or teams soliciting. We let a few things slide on charitable organizations that are doing things for fundraising or for good causes like that. If you like this stuff, please just support us by following us. Support us by putting comments on there. There's even places where you can put recommendations on our Facebook page. I ask that because we're delving into our next venture on this, which is interviewing some of these key players. I'm spending a lot of time talking to GM, talking to coaches. I'm talking to owners. I want to translate that into you so you can see what the other side is talking about and what they think and how they tick. It will only make you stronger as you go through this process and you're trying to ascend up the ladder. And that'll be both junior, U18, and college coaches, GMs, scouts. We're going to get a lot of different people on. It won't be on Sunday at 9 o'clock. We're probably going to do those as pre-recorded pieces that we drop in all over the place. But for us to be able to do this and to pull this off, I need gas money for the airplane so I can fly to different places. That means I need more advertisers. That means I need you to help me get there. Unless anybody just independently wants to pay for all the gas, then I'll accept that too. Anyway, have a great night. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes here and answer a couple questions, and thank you because a couple questions came in. First of all, like I said, comments are always welcome. Positive, flattering Jeff comments are always welcome. Andy, thank you so much. I'm glad that was good information for you tonight. Carl says, is there room for a defensive defenseman? Okay, defensive defenseman is being defined differently lately. First of all, you cannot play defense without being an incredibly good skater at Tier 1 and Tier 2 hockey. You need to be just a phenomenal skater. You have to be able to control your edges. You need to be a top skater, even if you're a defensive defenseman. Yes, if you're a big, burly guy, there's a chance you get, if you're 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", there'll always be a North American Hockey League team. If you skate average or above average, they will take a chance on you if you're big. If you're extremely physical, there's a team there'll be at least one team out there that'll take a chance on you. That's if you've got the pedigree moving up. You're playing Tier 1 Elite, you're playing, high level prep, you're playing Minnesota high school hockey. It's not going to come out of high school hockey out of Iowa or high school hockey out of Arkansas. It's not going to come from Tier 2 hockey, but they'll take a chance on a guy like that. The rest of them, you look at the Final Four teams that made it to Blaine this year. I don't think I saw a weak skater out there on the defensive side across the board. A lot of offensive players, but even the defensive lockdown guys have skill now. So I would say this, make sure the skating is extremely good. Carl, I see that about your son. In fact, I know who your son is. Skating. Size, there are a lot of guys that are in that 5'10" to 6'1" category that are playing high level, even in the NHL. The NHL is actually moved and reverted away from big and burly, and is become a speed league. It's become more of a Euro league over not more European players, but the style has become more fast and agile. So even if you're locked down, you're not a points producer. The two things that, if you're a defensive defenseman, that means that you're doing great jobs in the corner, and when that puck gets on your stick, you're getting it out tape to tape to a forward. So you have to be agile. You have to be able to move that first three steps that a defenseman make, has to be with their head up, have to be quick and agile to the sides, and be able to find lanes so that they're not getting intercepted on their passes, and they got to be able to launch that. That puck's got to be launched out over the blue line. That's the bottom line. So that's the answer to that. Perry, thanks for watching tonight. Anybody else have any things you can DM me, or you can wait till next week? Please let me know in your comments, and please like and follow, especially on YouTube. That'd be great. If you haven't watched that 5-minute video yet, I think you'll find that very, very helpful on understanding how the process works. And let's have a great week. I'm so glad that we're all back together, and I'll see you next week. Have a great night.